Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's episode, I wanted to replay the work of Colonel Reisner from the Austrian Armed Forces. He does an incredible job of breaking down the ongoing war between the Russian Federation and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its Ukrainian proxy forces. Unfortunately, the content does not get the amount of views that it deserves, given the amazing expertise that you see in this content. Now, it could be because the content is far and few between at times. It's not on a regular basis, but when he does make content, it is very good and very insightful. So I wanted to replay the latest episode for you, the viewer. Sit back and enjoy.
So welcome to all of you. Great to have you here. I will give you a brief for the next 30 minutes about the derivations of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I will mainly focus especially on the tactical operation level. I will also say a little bit about the strategic level, but my main focus would be the lowest, I would guess and say. So first of all, bottom line up front, some bullet points which I would like to present to you, and some of them I would like to discuss a little bit more in detail. So the first thing I would like to stress is that Russian doctrine and tactics haven't changed since Cold War 1.0 actually. But, and this is the important thing, they have adapted. And how they have adapted, I will show you a little bit more in detail. First question I would like to ask you, would you agree on that? The ones who have a little bit of knowledge on that or not? So the ones who think I'm right, raise their hand. And just a few, okay? And most of you think different. So they have changed a lot.
Since the Cold War.
Since the Cold War. But I see the mass of you has no opinion on that. Okay. So the second thing, I think you will agree on that one. Drones, counter unmanned aerial systems, electronic warfare have become the key to success. If, I would say, they're used in the right way. Would you agree on that? Who would like to raise his hand? A few, okay. Super. You're getting warm, I see, perfect. Who see it different? Okay, there's one person, perfect. Okay, thanks. So the next one, the transparent battlefield, something we have discussed in theory in the last years, is reality. But you still can hide and you can conduct maneuver. Would you agree on that? Okay, again, most of you have no opinion on that. Or who see different? Because this is also the topic of our forum today. Okay, raise your hand so that we can see it. So you see different. Okay. So the next thing, the coordination of ground, air, and sea forces is still vital and possible if your forces are properly trained. You agree on that? Okay, perfect. Someone who said it's different. Doesn't matter how good you're trained, you will not be able to do whatever is necessary. Okay, perfect. Joint fires is key. More rocket launchers, think of the HIMARS, for example, and other systems, and precise weapon systems. You know the discussion we have about JSO, JSAM, JDAM-ER, and all these kind of different weapon systems. If they can resist electronic warfare. This is very, very important. We will elaborate a little bit on that. Would you agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Super. With a different opinion? Okay, so everyone agrees. So let us discuss a little bit in detail the different things I would like to show you. The last, before I do that, the last thing which we will take with us is related to ground-based air defense, which you need if you want to protect your rear. But this point already goes a little bit into the strategic part of my presentation. But I think everyone would agree that if you don't have proper ground-based air defense, you will not be able to fight a long war. What we actually also see how it looks like at the moment in Ukraine and all the challenges they have. So first of all, a few words about the situation in Ukraine. We are having now phase 7 of the war of the Russians against Ukraine. What is the phase 7? It's the second Russian summer offensive. The second Russian summer offensive is already culminating. Actually, why is it culminating now? Because we see the Rasputitsa in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which will start and will then limit both sides heavily. But what you can see is that the second Russian summer offensive was fought quite more successful than the first Russian summer offensive. Yeah? Why? Because the Russians have adapted, especially on the tactical level. So you see a lot more infantry. What do the Ukrainians say? How many troops the Russians have currently in the eastern Ukraine? How many? Any numbers? 500,000. Another number? 640,000. And they expect that the Russians have at the end of the year 690,000 up to 700,000 soldiers. That's quite a lot, I would say. Yeah? It's agreed within the expert community that the Russians have the possibility to mobilize another 30 to 35,000 soldiers each month, actually. Now you can ask yourself what kind of possibilities the Ukrainians have at the same time. So we see a lot more infantry. And suffering, as Matthias already told you, is not a problem for them. And even losses are not that way discussed like we do in the West. We even see that they improved their armor. You know, this very famous turtle tank. I guess we will also hear a presentation of that one. We see a lot more electronic warfare and jamming, especially from the Russian side. I would even say they have a very good coverage along the whole front line. So this is already 1,000 kilometers. Plus another 100 kilometers at Kharkiv, plus another 100 kilometers at Kursk. And then we have some sophisticated little gimmicks, like first-person view drones, artillery, for the very famous gliding bombs called FAB or UMPK, up to 3,000 kilograms, which is quite heavy. Just recently there was a footage from an OTEP 9000, which is quite impressive, if you might have seen it in Vovchansk. And as you can see here, the Russians are adapting. Some things were invented by the Ukrainians, like for example the first-person view drone is a Ukrainian invention, but the problem is that the Russians are producing it on an industrial scale. And here it is, this most and deadliest weapon of the Ukrainian war. I brought one with me. We built that one at the academy, and we will start to train the cadets next year actually to show them how this thing works. So this is original, except the warhead, of course. And if you ask yourself what this RPG-7 warhead can manage to penetrate, so we try to do also this one. So this is actually what is the result if the drone hits your tank. And as you know, there are many, many videos in different social networks where you can see the impact of such a drone. I will just show you one. So as you can see, not much is left after this kind of pinpoint strike. And this is why this weapon is so successful. What do you think, how much had it cost to build this little drone? Any guess? 321 euros. So ask yourself what the Javelin costs, just to give you an idea actually. Yeah? But of course also these drones have their limitations. But you can see here on this slide that the use of these drones is more or less going and skyrocketing more or less. Yeah? It is the plan of both sides to build at least 1 million drones till the end of this year, which is a huge number. And it's not only this kind of drones, we have already different types of drones. So we have drones which are used for attacks, so the one I actually handed over to you. We have drones who are intercepting other drones. We have drones who are flying already wired to counter electronic warfare measures. We have huge drones, the Baba Yaga, which are actually used as bombers. We have drones which are used as mines and anti-tank weapons and personal anti-tank drones, and of course we also have drones who work in the electronic warfare domain. And this gives you a clear idea what's going on. And the latest invention was this one, not from Game of Thrones, but it's a dragon drone, actually a drone which is a flying flamethrower, more or less. And you can actually see that a lot different ideas are fielded, especially in Ukraine. And if you look a little bit in detail on the time and the different inventions we see in Ukraine, then you can see that we already have something what I call a revolution, even in connection with artificial intelligence. While on the other side, our forces are still at least maintain the same level they had before. So there is not even evolution. Just take one example. This is the Aladdin from the Bundeswehr, and the Bundeswehr still have the Aladdin, more or less. So there is not much which was done in a, I would say, improving way. Don't get me wrong, I just want to stress you a little bit on that. So you see that there is a capability gap between warfighting nations and non-warfighting nations or armies. And this gap is becoming bigger and bigger. And when you hear now that the North Koreans are sending soldiers into Ukraine, then you can ask yourself, why are they doing this? Because they want to get experienced soldiers, actually, to fight future wars. And this brings me to the next thing, maybe the question, what can we do with the transparent battlefield? And as we see, both sides are adapting very fast to also maneuver in such an environment. I will give you one Russia example. Very often you hear, as measure of the information warfare, the Russians are pretty much done. And this is why they already attack with motorcycles and these little ATVs. That's not really true, I would say. They do this because they try to maneuver in this kind of transparent battlefield. And this, by the way, is nothing new, because when you look at the Russian manuals, the new ones actually, which are discussing how to attack the Ukrainians when they are, let's say, in a defensive position, then you can see that they're using old manuals from the Second World War relating to this unit. What is it? Very famous, used by all...
Infantry Motorcycle Battalion.
Yes, perfect. You're the guy, actually. It's a motorcycle reconnaissance battalion. This is the battalion, more or less. It has one tank company and up to 100 motorcycles. 100 motorcycles, actually. Yeah? Right. So the Russians had it on the battalion level and on the regiment level. So they do actually exactly the same. They try to exploit with this soft force all the weak spots and try to penetrate into the Ukrainian defense lines. And they just use the same manuals like they had in the Second World War. Quite interesting, I would say. And I hope this is nothing new for you, what I have told you now, because you should know already after 959 days of war in Ukraine. But still, and this is also important, we have to adapt, but we still have to know the basics. I think you all remember the Ukrainian counteroffensive in June last year. So everyone was expecting that the Leopard tank will make the difference, as you know. But it was not like that, because the basics, and there's one abbreviation called SOSRA, which you have to follow, was not followed by the Ukrainians. It was not only because they had no real air force, which they were able to use actually to counter-strike or to prepare or to shape the battlefield, but a lot of these things here were not done accordingly. So there was no real suppress, there was no reduce, there was a little bit of obscure and secure, and finally the attack failed. And the result was that after 4 days, after the beginning of the operation, it was stopped, because General Solution said, okay, this is absolutely not possible to go on like this because the losses are too high. So completely different happened. So we see destroyed Bradleys and Leopard tanks, because, for example, they were destroyed, like from the textbook, from the Russian one, already when they were actually going to the line of departure from a distance of 15 kilometers by attack helicopters from the Russian side with anti-tank weapons, like we have learned at the academy a couple of years ago. So, as it was considered also during the Cold War. So you have still to know your basics, and then you can adapt to the battlefield, like also the Ukrainians, by the way, did, for example, because they found out that going from one field to another one, like playing chess, is not the way to do so. You have to use at least concealment, you have to use the terrain, which is actually the terrain we have in Ukraine, which is very flat, and then you can have success. But Also here, with high losses. So as you know, the Ukrainians had some success after the beginning of the operation, especially in Rapotinie, but they had very high losses, especially in the Russian minefields. The next thing I would like to stress you a little bit on is this one, and it's about electronic warfare. So this is another thing which was a big surprise for all of us, because everyone was thinking that electronic warfare in the night environment is not let's say, around anymore, because I guess some of you were serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, the Taliban and all the other ones. The anti-Iraqi forces never actually used any assets to deny this kind of environment, this kind of domain, but the Russians do it absolutely different. So you not only can see that the Russians are using these devices along the front lines, but they're also using it, let's say, in other areas of their interests, for example, in the Baltic states, for example, which is a huge topic there. And they have a wide range of different assets which they can actually use. And as you know, also for the Russians, this was a bad surprise, because at the beginning of the war, as you might know, a lot of Russian generals were killed. Why? Because every signal is a target. And with the help of the West, the Ukrainians were able to do very careful and successful targeting. Why do we know this? Every one of you, I guess, have heard about Discord leaks, the Discord leaks. So these documents which are coming in were telling us very clearly what scale actually was already, on what scale the assistance from the West to the Ukrainians was already done. Because this is, for example, a list of possible targets related to the electronic warfare domain. But again, we see also here that the Russians can exploit this and adapt themselves. And you see this very clearly when you look at the success rate of Western weapon systems. I'll just give you a few here. And they will ask you, what do you think is the success rate? I'll start with the weapon system in the middle, the Excalibur. So the hit rate was before Ukraine up to 95%. And it's now at, any guess? 6%. The producer just recently, a couple of months ago, at a conference in the US said, unfortunately, I have to tell you, it's only 6% anymore because of electronic warfare. What's about the Storm Shadow, Scalp, or Taurus? But the Taurus wasn't used, but Storm Shadow and Scalp. It's about 25%, 25 to 60%. Yeah. The same with the HIMARS systems. Some even say it's down to 10%. I think this is too low. It's not 10%, but it's 30 to 40%, which is also very low. Because as you know, HIMARS was very successfully used in spring 2022 because it ran havoc on the Russian logistic and communication system. But again, the Russians were able to adapt and adapt especially their electronic warfare measures against this weapon system. And the Joint Direct Attack Munition Extended Range, what is the rate here? I mean, everything I tell you is open source intelligence, just to make sure that we have no misunderstanding. So it's between 40 to 50%, so it's a little bit better. Well, and drones, of course, they fly all the time in contested areas, and this is why every side try to make them more intelligent, I would say. So that means using them with more artificial intelligence. I'll show you one footage from the Ukrainians, which just came in recently. And this, it's said, is already a drone which is flying very, let's say, to a certain scale already autonomous, more or less, because you can actually see that the drone tries to identify the different targets. You can see that the drone assisted with artificial intelligence is already pinpoint targeting some of the different targets which are available, if it's a car or if it's, for example, a person, a soldier, whatever it is. That means one of the things which are done currently is massively research into improving especially drone systems to make them possible to fly in a very highly autonomous way. And that brings me to the point to show you this picture. Who of you knows this guy? At least one.
Mitchell.
Right, Billy Mitchell. He is the father of the United States Army Air Force, today United States Air Force. He was the guy, after the end of the First World War, who said, listen up, there will be a time where it will be possible to drop a bomb from a plane on a battleship and sunk this battleship. You know what happened to him after he said that? He was court-martialed. He was actually losing his rank. Roosevelt said, this guy is completely crazy, but today he is the father of the United States Air Force. Why? Because he knew at that time that we see developments in the technical field which will make a big difference. So the question is, do we have already a revolution in military affairs, or is it still an evolution? What do you think? So who thinks it's already a revolution? A few. Who thinks nothing new, it's just an evolution of weapon systems? Okay, a lot more. So this is one of the things I would recommend to discuss heavily during the next hours, actually, because it will decide also the future and how we fight wars. What we can agree on is that we see already a fight which is going on in the multi-domain. So we have in all the different domains certain assets which are used, they interact together, and we even have new domains. So I would even say that the electromagnetic spectrum is a new domain. Would you agree on that? Well, this is also discussed very heavily by the experts. Is the electronic warfare and the electronic magnetic spectrum an own domain? I would say yes, because first of all, it interacts with all the other ones, and as you can see, the one who is controlling the electromagnetic field is the one who can make the difference, especially when it comes to joint fires and all the other stuff. And I also would emphasize one thing, because if you look at space, for example, as you all know, Starlink has a very, very prominent role in Ukraine, but who is the owner of Starlink? Elon Musk. Is this a guy working for the government, or is it a private person? It's a private person, and if you look a little bit what he's posting on X, for example, or how he's performing now together with Trump, then it's interesting, I would say, if one of the main assets, which is very important, is controlled by a private person. So what does it mean for the future if especially the information domain and the cyber domain is not controlled by us or by the government, but by especially private companies? So before I end my brief, just a few bullets which I also would like to stress referring to the strategic level. So the one I have already said, ground-based air defense, which is important on tactical operation level, but also it's important to understand that it is needed on the strategic level. The next one is, I would say, the space domain is a key terrain, or can be a key terrain, if it is under own control. As you all know, the United States Armed Forces are buying 500 satellites from Starlink to get a little bit more autonomous from Starlink, which gives you an idea how far Starlink is already. The cyber domain, which we have heard a lot in the last years, is not the key terrain, but it is an important enabler for the information domain. It's what I call the magic carpet. So the info domain is the magic carpet, and the information on this magic carpet is going to the target audience. And we are all the target audience, because you consume media, you have your own opinion, and finally you go to vote for a party. And you vote for the party you think will do the right for you and for the future of Europe or whatever this is. So the next thing, which I also want to stress, is you have to dominate the information domain. If the opponent is dominating the information domain, you should not wonder if your people at the end of the day say, well, the Russians, they're not so bad. You have to understand them. I mean, NATO, to be honest, I think we have to see both sides, and so on and so on. I'm just provoking you a little bit, but I think you understand what I mean. So if you want to maintain momentum when it comes to supplies, the center of gravity, and so on, then you have to make sure that the people think the same like you are. And if it's not the case, if you somehow leave them, then you should not wonder if the difference is happening. I would say it's also interesting that the time of the expeditionary conflicts are over, but our opponents fight a global war. If you look at Africa, for example, what nations have withdrawn from Africa in the last months, or even years? What's about France, for example? There's one guy from Estonia who served with me in Mali. Is he around? I'm not sure. Yesterday he was here. Yeah, so how many of us are still in Mali?
This is almost.
Well, we left, actually. The Russians are there. And it's the same as Niger, Chad, and you can just follow down the list. And this is a problem. Yeah, I guess you all know the game Risk, where you play little plastic soldiers on different parts of continents. We lost Africa. It never belonged to us, don't get me wrong, but I mean, when it comes to influence and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I would even say there's high pressure on NATO, because if NATO wants to succeed, it has to prepare for this kind of long wars and Cold War 2.0 in the future. If it wants to survive as an organization, and as someone, everyone thinks, okay, it makes sense to be part of it. And there are a lot of tricky questions to ask. Baltic states, for example, what will happen if, and so on and so on. And they have to be answered now, because the situation is becoming more and more violent.